Senator Ron Johnson. Senator, thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning.
What else can you tell us about the dinner conversation and just how many details were talked about as it relates to tax reform between both Republicans, Democrats, and the administration last night?
I think the president led a very good, genuine, bipartisan discussion, attempting to find areas of agreement on not only tax reform, but also infrastructure spending. So, again, I think it's a very genuine attempt. I completely support the president's attempt reaching out. If we're going to do big things in this country, it's generally good to have support from all sides. And certainly one of the points I made to the president, both of us coming from the private sector, to succeed in the private sector, you have to tenaciously pursue areas of agreement. Unfortunately, in politics, often people would exploit differences. So if you use that business person's mentality of trying to find areas of agreement, starting with the goals. Let's face it, we all want a more prosperous America. We want Americans to put more money in their paychecks, end this wage stagflation. So if you concentrate on those areas of agreement, on those goals, and then start looking toward shared areas of agreement on solutions to provide that kind of prosperity. Certainly, we need pro-growth tax reform. Our tax system is not competitive. Heidi Heitkamp has done a lot of leadership in terms of regulatory reform. Joe Manchin, Joe Donnelly and I came up with Right to Try. So there's so many areas of agreement. If we concentrate on the areas of agreement, you don't even have time for the areas of disagreement. But again, that's generally not the political process. So I appreciate the president's business person's approach to trying to find areas of agreement. I completely support that.
I just wanted to follow on something you mentioned about infrastructure. Clearly, that's an area that may be ripe for bipartisan agreement. Is there any talk of blending those two together, tax reform and infrastructure? Or are you talking about two separate pieces of legislation, two separate packages here?
My guess is they'll probably be separated. But again, where we all agree is that high-speed broadband is incredibly important for not only big cities, but also rural states. And let's face it, West Virginia, Indiana, North Dakota, Wisconsin, we have a lot of rural areas that are underserved now in high-speed broadband. So there's an area of agreement, and that was certainly talked about last night as well. So again, my main point is tenaciously pursue areas of agreement, shared goals, shared purposes, and I think the policy solutions will fall out of that.
Senator, this bipartisan meeting looks great, but it was just over 2 weeks ago that the president tweeted, if Senate Republicans don't get rid of the filibuster rule and go to a 51% majority, few bills will be passed. So is this a reset? Are we to expect not just bipartisan conversations, but a bipartisan approach to crafting legislation? Or is this just a conversation?
Well, it'll take two to tango. So again, I give the president credit. Certainly, for my approach has always been to try and find bipartisan support. Did that with Right to Try with Joe Donnelly. So it's the starting point. Now, are we going to get 8 Democrats to sign on to major pieces of legislation? That might be a stretch, but it doesn't hurt to begin the conversation, whether it's health care reform, whether it's tax reform, whether it's infrastructure, talking to our colleagues, trying to find those areas of agreement. If we make a really good argument, if we find those areas of agreement, we might surprise everybody, including ourselves, that maybe we can get some votes on these things. So again, that's to me the way you start any conversation, particularly on big policy initiatives here in the United States Congress.
But Senator, are you confident that the tax reform can be moved along without having to get married to a giant infrastructure package or the wall or the DREAM Act? Can it run in its own lane?
I believe so. Again, it'd be great if we can do it bipartisan. If not, we're certainly setting ourselves up through a budget process to use reconciliation to do it just with Republican votes or maybe a couple of Democrats joining us. Again, I can't predict exactly what the outcome is. I'm just saying I come from a manufacturing background. If you don't have a good process, you don't end up with a good product. So I am completely in support of this process of at least starting discussions, trying to find those areas of agreements on a bipartisan basis.
Let's talk about the process. Just been consulting with my colleague, Kayla Tausche, who's on the Hill. She was in Speaker Ryan's weekly press conference, asked him about the outline that we're going to get on September 25th. He said it was going to be a conservative plan, but Treasury Secretary Mnuchin told us yesterday at Delivering Alpha, they're talking about these exceptions for pass-throughs on lowering the corporate rate that would favor manufacturing companies over services companies like accounting firms. Is that something you and other Republicans can get behind? Doesn't really sound like a traditional Republican idea.
Well, I actually have my own proposal. It's being written in legislative language now where we treat all business income as pass-through income. In other words, tax corporate income at the shareholder level, progressive rates. I call it a true Warren Buffett tax. That may be a little bit too big a paradigm shift, but we absolutely have to be concerned. If we're going to be able to accomplish corporate tax reform, which we have to benchmark against our global competitors, make America's businesses the most competitive in the world, we can't leave pass-through entities behind. 81% of American businesses report their income as a pass-through entity, and the shareholders pay the tax on that income. So we need to make sure in some way, shape, or form that we pretty well equate the taxation of business income, whether it's a C Corp, an S Corp, or an LLC.
Finally, Senator, NBC News, I think, is confirming the Times report that the president will have dinner tonight with Schumer and Pelosi. This is per 3 people who were briefed. Topics will include the DREAM Act. What is the GOP response to something like that?
Again, I think discussions on a bipartisan basis are a good thing. When it comes to the DREAM Act, our response to DACA, I really do believe that his actions, which I think were necessary, because I think what President Obama did was unconstitutional. It did poison the well. It did prevent further immigration reform from being passed. I think President Trump, this could be a Nixon in China moment, being a catalyst for real immigration reform, ending the incentives for illegal immigration, strengthening our border, as well as treating people that came here through no fault of their own with real compassion and humanity.
I mean, it's more than just conversation. Our Eamon Javers tweeting that the dinner tonight is expected to include Ross, Mnuchin, Mulvaney, Kelly, all key members of the president's inner circle and his cabinet. This outreach and deal-making by the president with Democrats. Tell us what's going on behind the scenes, how Republicans are actually reacting to it.
Well, again, I'm all for the President of the United States reaching out to everybody like a business person, tenaciously trying to find areas of agreement on shared goals, on shared purposes. That's the problem-solving process. Start there, an achievable goal, and then you can start arguing about what the solutions are to achieve those goals. But let's face it, I don't care whether you're Democrat or Republican. We all want a safe, prosperous, secure America. We want to end wage stagflation. We want to put more money in people's pockets.
You don't think he's hedging in case he can't get the full Republican votes, as what happened in health care here on tax reform?
Possibly. But again, from my standpoint, the process of including everybody, trying to find areas of agreement, winning political arguments. Let's make sure that whatever we do in terms of taxes promotes growth, because that's how you put more money in Americans' paychecks. So let's get those areas of agreement down first, and I think we have a better chance of whether we do it, pass it on a bipartisan basis, or using reconciliation.
All right, we'll see what happens. Senator, thank you for joining us.
Have a good day.
Ron Johnson of Wisconsin.